Hey team, welcome back. Hope you're doing okay. Since we last saw each other, there's been a lot going on here in my Bubble Bobble game, and I wanted to show you some of what I've done. The first big thing, as I promised, I added all of the platforms to the game. You can see that now all those platforms are there, and ideally that's going to help with the gameplay. I tweaked some of the locations of the platforms so that they are where I want them to be. Disabling results and running code. You can now see that it almost looks exactly like it did last time. But I promise you, there are platforms here, 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 and here. There is a little trick that I can use to show you this, and you may want to do this as you are verifying that your code is working the way you want it to. Just below the scene view, you can set a property called shows physics, and you set it equal to true. And what that does is it shows you the physics bodies in your scene so that you can see that everything is where you think it is. We'll run the code. And now you can see that I'm not kidding, that we have all of these platforms where they should be. You know, looking at those, I'm going to nudge those over actually. Give me a sec. All right, that's better. So just changing the x coordinate of all three of these to really be closer to the edges of the platform. So we have this now. And you can see there's a little circle representing the physics body for the character. And we have these little boxes representing the physics bodies for each of the platforms, which is great. I'm going to leave that on for now, and then when I'm done with this, I can just turn off that property, and the physics bodies are all going to act the way they're supposed to, but they're going to be invisible. In the last video, I also talked about algorithms and gameplay, and I came up with some specific goals that I wanted to reach. When the screen is touched, when you touch it to the left of the character, I want the character to move to the left. When the touch is to the right of the character, I want to give the character a positive velocity. And then I also said when you release the screen, I want Bob to stop horizontally. I also have, if you have a double tap on the screen, I want the character to jump. And so that's going to be done by giving the character a vertical velocity and just setting the vertical velocity of the character. And that's our goal. We want to get that movement working. And since I have this mapped out, it's going to help quite a bit to get that done. One last thing to show is that's a lot of code drawing these platforms. There's 9 platforms. And so I have moved them all to a separate function, draw platforms, which then clears this out so that it's a lot more straightforward. And so with all of that code kind of moved elsewhere, that kind of lets me focus a bit more on these touch events, which are going to move my character around. Let's make this character move around the game. It should come as no surprise that my first stop is going to be in the touches began function, because I want this character to move whenever I am touching the screen, and at that moment my finger touches the screen, the touches began function runs. This if-then statement is how I make that behavior that I had in my slide actually happen. If the location, the x-coordinate of the location of the tap is to the left of the position of the Bob sprite, I want to give it a velocity of -100. If it's to the right, that is the else, I want to give it a velocity of +100, which means to the right. Let's run that and see how well it works. Ooh, that's making me dizzy. I wouldn't have caught this at any other point in building this game, but this makes it clear that I need to add an additional property to my Bob sprite physics body. I do this using the bobsprite.physicsbody.allows rotation equals false. So I don't want it to rotate. There's friction on the bottom of the platform, so as I am giving the Bob sprite a velocity, it's kind of catching on the friction of the surface, and I don't want that to happen. All right, cool. So it's moving left and right, and let's let him fall off that platform. Lovely. Ooh, there's something else wrong with this that I'm going to fix a little bit later, but I don't really like the movement there. I don't like how it's moving without friction. I want to make it, when I release the touch, I want Bob to stop. So that's looking pretty good, but let's now go to the touches ended function, and let's say that when touches ended, let's set the velocity to 0. Right, there we go. So there's the code. Okay, that's looking a little better. So that's definitely what we want. Okay, and it's begging to add maybe that animation at some point, but one thing at a time. So we have our character moving around. Maybe I want it faster. Okay, that's looking slick. Next thing, let's do that double tap so that our character jumps. Now that double tap is actually happening inside of the touches ended function. So let's add that here. Right, so there's my if statement for the tap count. Moment of truth. Okay, so it's definitely kind of doing it. It's a little awkward. It's a little weird because when I do the double tap, it moves in a direction, and maybe later I want to try to fix that. But there's another issue, and that is, you might remember from the original gameplay that when the character jumped up, it actually passed through the platform, and that was how the character was able to get to the different platforms. It's also whoa, all over the place. So I want to make it so that when I do the double tap to make the jump happen, I want the character to pass right through the platform, and then once the character is falling back down, I want to make it so that the character actually falls on that platform. That's going to use another property that's built into the physics body. So let me add that in, and then we'll talk about it. There we go. So there's my if-then statement. Here's how the logic works. I'm saying if the velocity is positive, meaning the character is going up, I'm taking a property on that physics body called the collision bit mask, and I'm setting it equal to 0. The collision bit mask is what determines what objects in the game, what sprites in the game, this sprite will actually collide with. When you clear its bit mask, you're telling SpriteKit, don't let this collide with anything in the game. In the else situation, this means that the velocity is less than about 1 unit of velocity. Even if it's still going up, I'm going to set its bit mask equal to 1. And because it's not 0, it'll start colliding again with things in the scene. So we'll do the double tap. My character is never coming back. I need to decrease this a bit. That's not enough. Okay, that's the behavior I want, but now I'm realizing that gravity is not strong enough. So I'm going to change the gravity in my universe because I have that power. Let's say maybe -4. Okay, maybe even a little more. Okay, so the gravity is feeling right. Let's go back to my velocity now, and let's give it more of a jump. All right, that looks great. That's exactly the kind of thing I want to have happen. Now there's a little bit of unrealistic physics there because my character can jump in the middle of the air. I think I might be okay with that for now. I'm noticing something else actually as I'm tapping and holding it, and this is something I would only notice as I'm playing with the game and using it myself. What I want to have happen is when I am touching and holding the screen, I want the character to keep moving. I want its velocity to kind of stay constant. And it makes sense what's happening. I'm giving it its velocity, I'm holding it down, but friction is slowing it down. I think I'm going to need to go about this in a totally different way. So let's change some things around. So first thing, I'm making a variable called Bob Speed. I'm defining it at the top of my game. And I've just realized I need to make this a var because this Bob Speed is going to be changing over time. The next thing I'm doing is I'm making the touch event change the value of this Bob's speed. Similar to what I had before, if I'm tapping to the left of the character, I'm setting that speed to be -200. If I'm tapping to the right, it's going to be, positive 200. And in the case where the touch is ending, so I'm releasing, I'm setting that Bob speed equal to 0. So I'm using the touch event to set a variable that is the velocity of my character. And now I'm going to this didFinish update function, which we know runs every frame, and I am setting the velocity of the Bob sprite to be equal to that variable. So every frame, based on that other variable, Bob speed, I'm just going to set the velocity equal to it. It's moving left and right as I want it to, okay? And it's definitely the behavior that I wanted. And what's, again, I wouldn't have known this until I actually tried it. But it just makes sense when I'm holding it that it should move in that direction until I release it. I know that that's exactly the effect that I want to have. And so there we have it. I now have my character moving around, and as it's going around, there is one last thing that I want to do. Notice how my character is below the bottom platform? I didn't think about the edges of my scene. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create another physics body that goes from this top line to this edge to the bottom edge and goes up this vertical side, and I'm going to make it so that there is a physical barrier that keeps my character from going outside. All right, let's add that in. So I'm creating a new sprite. It's an SK shape node because it's just a simple rectangle, and I'm giving it this width and height, which from experimenting I know is going to be the right size for the edges of the game. And I'm using a physics body that you can make that follows a path around a shape. And I'm using the inside of that sprite that I just made as the shape. And I'm setting the position of that sprite so that it's sitting in the right place in the game. Forgetting that all-important add child, got to add my inside frame to the scene. And now, because I have that property on, you can see that I have this outline defining the edge of that physics body. And now, as I move my character around, it lands all the way on the bottom. It's doing exactly what I want. So we're good to go. So I now have my movement of the character moving around pretty well. All right, and now I think I'm ready to start thinking about adding the fruit and adding an enemy to the scene, and that's going to get us into conversations about collisions. So we'll see you in the next video to learn more about that.